you know, there's just these times, every pastor loves having these messages that are just, they're just great messages. You're kind of on the edge of your seat. You're like, yeah, what are you going to do next? What are you going to say next? And today is not one of those days. Okay, so here I wanted to say that up front. Here's what's going on. So we started a series last week on the book of Proverbs, and I love the book of Proverbs. And that's not to discount the importance of today and actually how much I get excited about it. But one of the big things today, maybe you've heard this thrown out, but the idea of biblical illiteracy and just kind of not really knowing how to read the Bible or what's going on in things. And we felt that as we're going into the book of Proverbs, Pastor Thor started us out last week, we wanted to make sure that as a church, as we were challenged to read a chapter a day, 31 chapters in Proverbs, 31 days in January, that we actually know how to read this book. Because it is a little different from all the other books of the Bible, and it kind of falls into some of its own things within that, and incredibly important. If we are going to gain something from our time in the Word, we need to know how to do that. We need to make sure that we are actually learning the right things from it. Has anybody ever had a conversation with someone and they, start quoting scripture or talking about what the Bible says, and you're just like the guy from Princess Bride, you're like, I don't think you know what that actually means. You keep using that word, but it doesn't mean what you think it means. And we want to make sure that that's not us. We want to make sure that we can have an understanding of what we're reading. And so we're going to jump in. And some of this maybe is old news to you. Maybe you know this already, but we want to make sure if we're going to spend a month as a family going through the book of Proverbs, that we are all on the same page and we kind of know what we're doing with it. So we finished 2018 opening up this book, and we're going to start 2019 by continuing in it. So the first thing about Proverbs is this. We're going to look at a few things. We're going to look at the overall structure, and then at the end, I promise we're going to come full circle. We're going to make sure we have some action steps for us today. But we want to make sure that if we're ever taking an action step, that we know why we're doing it, and that we're taking the right step. And so the first thing we need to remember is that within the Bible, there are 66 books, and these books fall into different genres. Just like today, if you go to the library and you take out a book, it may have a different genre. Music has different genres, and it's important that you understand that. If you start reading a book that is a history book and you wanted poetry, you're going to be bored and you're not going to like it. In the same way, we have genres in the Bible. There is a poetry genre. There's history. There's epistles or letters. There's prophetic books. And if you read one of the books that is poetry and we read it like it's history, the problem is that at times maybe the original writer was more focused on that last word rhyming with the word before it than on the actual specific details of what's being said. And that's not to discount the authority of the Bible and say that this doesn't matter. It actually is to make sure that we are protecting the integrity and authority of the Bible by reading it the way that it was intended to be read. So Proverbs falls into a genre that's known as wisdom literature. Within wisdom literature, there are two other books as well that fall into it. It's the book of Job and the book of Ecclesiastes. There's a few sections of other books that maybe would kind of fall into this, but those are our wisdom literature, and it's important as we read through Proverbs that we understand how these books offset, interact, complement each other. You see, Proverbs is a book that talks about the majority of the time, the normal situation, this is what happens. Job and Ecclesiastes are about, okay, every once in a while there's this exception to the rule, and we're going to talk about that. If you've read through the book of Job, Job is about a guy that has it all and loses it all. Everything. I mean, it's a very kind of depressing book as you read through it. And it's just this whole idea of, he did everything he was supposed to. He should have everything that we see in Scripture, that, if you live this upright life, it should be going well. But then he just loses it all. Ecclesiastes is a book where it starts off, and verse 1 is introducing the book, and this is the author, and verse 2 is meaningless, everything is meaningless. And you feel like you just opened up a teenager's diary, and you're like, what is going on here? Like, Oh, it's just like super dramatic. Everything is, wisdom is meaningless, and folly is meaningless, and pleasure is meaningless. And all these, it's just, what does it even matter? And his whole point is this: it doesn't matter if you're wise, it doesn't matter if you're foolish, you're going to die. Right? Like, how many wish we would have started with that book of the Bible at the beginning of the year? Now it is a great book. There are great things to pull out of there, but it's important that we understand where Proverbs is, what it means, and then the other books in relation to it. So I'd encourage you, as you finish up, if you're not on a reading plan, as you finish up the Proverbs one, jump over and read the other two as well. And you'll see Job is living an upright life. He's doing what Proverbs tells him to do, but the things that he feels should happen in his life aren't happening. So it's important that as we read through books, we understand kind of what is happening in the book, where it's coming from, and there's three things here at the beginning that I want us to keep in mind. That I want to share with you that as you read through the book of Proverbs, these three things are very important that we keep in mind. All right, and the book of Proverbs is collected wisdom from God's people over generations, and they are principles to live by. They are not promises from God. And this is one of the most important distinctions that we can make as we read through this book. Because if you read this incorrectly, it's going to end up making you incredibly frustrated. And you might start to question God. You might start to question the integrity of his word. Because you're reading it in a way that it wasn't meant to be read. If we read them as promises, we're going to get frustrated. So Proverbs are actually, they're probabilities, not promises. They're probabilities, not promises. Proverbs 10:27 says this: "The fear of the Lord adds length to life, but the years of the wicked are cut short." If we live with the fear of God in our life, and we're going to talk about what that means later, because I think that phrase, the fear of God, is thrown around and not always understood. But if we live with the fear of God in our life, and we walk wisely, our life should go well, and we should live long. If we choose not to do that, our life probably isn't going to go well, and it will be cut short. The problem is, I know a lot of people who have lived amazing lives and followed, almost everything that I can see that they've done. They've followed things in the Bible, and their life is cut shorter than what I feel like it should be. And I know other people that will just say they probably aren't living that way, and they're living to be 80, 90 years old and all these things. And if you read that as a promise, you're going to start to think, well, it's wrong. And you're going to start to think, well, does the Bible lie? Another example of this, Proverbs 22:6. "Start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it." It's a very common verse, a verse that many of us know, many of us probably reflect on with great hope, as we should. But what happens when that doesn't happen? I think many people, if they feel like they're a good Christian, they are not going to question God, and they aren't going to question the Bible. This is where their mind goes. I'm not going to question those things. So then they turn and they start questioning themselves. Well, I must not have been a good parent then. I must not have trained them properly in the way they were supposed to go because they didn't turn back to it. See, whether a child walks away from what they were taught or not, that's not on you. Using that logic, we would have to turn around and say that God was not a good heavenly father and did not train Adam and Eve well. They were given free will. He allowed them to exercise it, and they chose to walk away. Now, if you want to go and tell God, hey, you're not a good father and you train them poorly, go ahead, just give me like 5 seconds to run the other direction so I don't get in on the damage. No, that's not going to actually happen. But I'm just saying, like, are we going to stand here and tell God that he did a poor job? Not many people are going to do that. And in the same way, it's not our burden to carry. Our kids have free will. And you can train them and you can do everything you can to raise them in the way that they're supposed to go. But in the end, they have free will. It's their choice, not yours. And it is not your burden to carry that. That doesn't mean you're a bad parent. I think for some of you in the room today, maybe that is the main thing that you needed to hear today as an encouragement as we read through this. If you read Proverbs as if they're promises from God, then you'll either have a problem with God or you're going to have a problem with the Bible. They aren't formulas for success. They talk about the typical way that things happen, the norm, but not all those exceptions that are out there. Even in other parts of Scripture, we see with Joseph in his life, and he's doing everything he should, and he's worked his way up in Potiphar's house. He's the head of the house. He's living how he should. And it's almost as if he had the book of Proverbs in front of him, because when Potiphar's wife starts to seduce him, it's like his morning devotion was Proverbs 5 and Proverbs 7. Talking about like the promiscuous woman and the adulterous woman, because he literally runs out of there. He follows exactly what you're supposed to do. And what happens? Does he have a great life with all this blessing? No, he loses his position and he gets thrown in jail. And his life actually continues to be kind of crummy for a while. The second thing that we need to remember, first one is that they are probabilities, not promises. The second one is that Proverbs are complementary, not contradictory. And this is important because as you read through, you're going to all of a sudden read something and you're going to be like, man, that sounds familiar, sort of. I feel like I read that 2 chapters ago. But the exact opposite. How many of you guys, maybe at like Thanksgiving meal, you've been over and grandma's in and she's cooking all the food and she tells you, well, too many cooks spoil the broth, or too many cooks in the kitchen. Right? Because what is she saying in that moment? Get out of here. I know what I'm doing. Don't touch my food. Don't change my oven to that setting. You are just going to make this worse. I can do this. I've been doing it for decades. Let me do it. But then you finish up the meal and you're sitting there and you kind of push your chair back and everyone's looking around and someone or maybe even grandma at the same time says, all right, many hands make light work. You're like, come on, woman, make up your mind. No, she wants her cake and she's going to eat it too. And as we read through the Proverbs, there's times where it kind of says things like that, where it feels like it's going to contradict itself. One of the best examples is it literally happens back to back. Proverbs 26, verses 4 and 5. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be just like him. Okay, I got that. Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes. What? Come on, like what am I supposed to do with that? What is supposed to be happening here? See, whenever you see something that seems to contradict itself, usually that means you need to dig a little deeper. And this is not just in Proverbs, this is anywhere in Scripture. You need to dig a little bit deeper. That's what I found. Every time I dig deeper, every time I really try and understand what's going on here, what is the context, what's the original situation, I always start to find a way, man, that really does work together in that. And what's happening here is actually going to lead us into our third thing we need to remember, and that's this, that Proverbs are situationally sensitive. All right, depending on the situation, it might be different. And we can use Proverbs 26, 4 and 5 to say this. We could use our illustration of grandma to say this. She has a way to cook the food, but she probably doesn't care what order you stack the dishes on the counter. But in Proverbs 26, 4 and 5, what's happening here is it depends on your situation. You have to have wisdom in order to use this wisdom. And that means you have to know what type of fool you are dealing with. This is the main theme in Proverbs. Let me just say that right now. As you read through Proverbs, you have to have the discernment and the wisdom to appropriately apply these Proverbs. And what I mean by what type of fool is this? Is the fool teachable? Maybe you know somebody that they are just like, they spout off what they know and they are convinced of it, and it doesn't matter what anybody says. Maybe they're talking about this type of truck, and they're talking about this type of car, this is better, and this is better, and then they start branching into other things, and they move into politics, and this is how it is, and I saw this article on Facebook, and you're sitting there, and you know, you're wise enough to know, I'm not entering this. This isn't my fight, because it's not going to end well. I'm gonna put some logic into this conversation, and they're going to double down on their stupidity. You cannot argue with a fool who does not want to learn. You will waste your time, you will waste your energy, and you're going to walk away really annoyed, and you're probably going to have a hard time viewing that person the way that Christ commands us to view them. Now, on the other hand, if there is someone who's maybe a little foolish and they're saying things, but you know what? Man, if I kind of say this in this moment and I say it in this way, I really think they'd take it to heart. And I think it might change the way that they think about this. Then we absolutely have a responsibility to do that. Because if we don't, they're going to continue in their foolish ways, and it may even get worse. So these two proverbs right next to each other, even though they seem as if they contradict each other, they actually complement each other. You just have to be wise enough to know when to use each one. It's situationally. There we go. I knew when I put that in there, I'm like, oh, you're going to struggle. Sensitive. This is why we cannot just take one proverb out of context. Another one. Proverbs 23, 13 and 14. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you punish them with the rod, they will not die. Punish them with the rod and save them from death. I'm not going to go into a big parenting thing today. But this one, if you treat this like law, you might end up with a little bit of a dangerous idea of parenting. What this is a general principle meant to encourage those who are reluctant to maybe use a form of discipline when that form of discipline may in fact save their life. Now, that being said, same as with the fool, you need to know what type of child you are dealing with. If you have multiple kids, you probably know that you don't raise them all the same way. Some kids, the way you discipline them is different from others. And I guarantee you're reminded of this all the time by the other kids saying, that's not fair. If I did that, this is what would happen. But we're wise enough to know that in a certain situation, you know what? Maybe using a type of discipline is actually going to push them further away. Maybe physical discipline doesn't work with them at all. I know of someone who, when they were younger, it did not work. They were 3 or 4 years old, and they'd look at their parents and they'd say, what are you going to do, spank me? Now, how many of you guys know in that moment, you want to? Like, you bet I am. It didn't work. It didn't work. You have to find other ways. For some people, all they need is a strong reprimand. For other people, maybe they need to be encouraged. And this isn't just in parenting. Maybe as a boss, you have employees, and the way that you interact with them needs to be different. One employee, you just kind of put the fear of God in them. Like, hey, I'm the boss. I sign your paycheck. Go work. And that's all they need. And someone else, you have to take the time to encourage them, to call out the strengths that they have. Is that frustrating as a boss? Yes. But if you are wise, you'll do it. Because things are situational. So those 3 things we need to remember as we're reading through this book over this month. Proverbs are probabilities, not promises. Complementary, not contradictory. Situationally sensitive. Those are important things for us to remember. The layout of the book of Proverbs, this is always important as you read. If any of you guys ever read from a study Bible, don't gloss over those first few pages before you get into the book. Talks about the author, talks about who received it, talks about the date that it was written, gives you a breakdown of it. All these things are important if you want to really get the most out of it. Can you still get something out of it being ignorant of those? Probably. Your chance of taking it out of context increases. But you need to understand those things. And so I want to look, chapter 1, verse 1 through 9 is our introduction. Just gives us, this is the purpose of the book. This is kind of who wrote this part. There are several authors within Proverbs. Like we said, it was gathered over kind of generations. Then we move on, and the rest of chapter 1 up through chapter 9 is the first main section. And the rest of the book is filtered through kind of the moral code and the ethics that are set up in these first 9 chapters. And it's a father that is speaking to his son. And he's telling stories. He has 10 speeches to his son. So these are kind of longer sections that he's going through and talking about within there. He talks about how if you live with wisdom and fear of the Lord, it's going to lead to virtue and integrity and generosity, which will lead to success and peace. Now again, we know that that's not a promise, that's a principle. Then he warns about folly and evil and how they lead to selfishness and pride, and those lead to ruin and shame. So the son should make his pursuit of wisdom his utmost top priority in life. The next section is chapters 10 through 29, and this is our classic Proverbs. They're short, 1-line, 2-line, 4-line Proverbs that are kind of quick, easy to remember. In the day, they probably would have even maybe rhymed with some of them. And they were meant to pop into your head when you needed them. And then the last 2 chapters are filled with poems. Chapter 30 is from a man named Agur, and he essentially is, how many of you guys are glad that's not your name? Agur. He's essentially like us. He starts off the chapter just saying, hey, I'm your everyday guy. I'm a little ignorant. I could use some help. Luckily, I have all this wisdom in front of me. Let me share the wisdom I've learned. And then chapter 31 is Lemuel, and he's sharing lessons from his mother, and it finishes with the classic wife of noble character, a woman of noble character, and just basically talks about, okay, if someone lived out a life applying all of these things, what would it look like? That's what it would look like. So, little encouragement, ladies in the room, don't be discouraged as you read chapter 31. None of the guys would be able to do it either. So, don't worry. All right, we're all together, but that's kind of the example of what it would look like. And it's so important that we keep all these things in context. And Proverbs is a book that's really easy to pull things out of context because it almost makes it easy. Right? Like when you have a verse that seems to stand alone, you can grab it and kind of like throw it back like a comeback, like you're back on the playground in elementary days. Like, I know you are, but what am I? I'm rubber, you're glue. Anything you say bounces off me and sticks to you. You know, and like that's kind of like what the Proverbs are written like, because they actually were written for children for the most part. And it's easy to pull them out of context, but we have to remember, like we had said, context is what allows us to use wisdom, to grab the ones that complement or seem to contradict each other and use them in situations that we should. Proverbs actually even has something to say about pulling it out of context. Knowing a proverb is not enough. You have to use it in the right time and the right situation. Proverbs 26, verse 7, and then verse 9 both demonstrate this. Verse 7 says, like the useless legs of one who is lame is a proverb in the mouth of a fool. Like a thorn bush in a drunkard's hand is a proverb in the mouth of a fool. You see, legs are meant for us to stand, for us to walk. But a paralyzed leg is not going to help you in that endeavor. In the same way, memorizing a proverb in the mouth of a fool is not going to make him wise. Because he's going to say it at the wrong time. He's going to use it in the wrong way. it's not going to be applied correctly. And actually the second one, and this happens a lot in Proverbs where it sounds like they say two things twice and they're the same thing. Usually the second one is like, hey, there's a general idea, let me narrow it down even deeper. And the second one is saying, you know what, beyond that, like someone who grabs a thorn bush thinking that's a good thing to, beat their sibling with, they're going to hurt the sibling and they're going to hurt themselves. And the proverb in the mouth of a fool is going to hurt everybody involved. It might even it's not even just going to be neutral and it didn't fit and it doesn't make sense. It might actually even cause damage to everybody that's listening. So a proverb must be applied at the right time and right situation, which takes wisdom. Which is weird because I thought we were reading this book to get wisdom. So this seems pointless. No, Proverbs talks about how we can gain wisdom. Pastor Thor talked about what biblical wisdom was last week. It's not just knowledge, it's the application of that knowledge correctly. Knowledge is from that annoying person that always reminds you that tomatoes are fruit. Wisdom is not putting a tomato in fruit salad. It's going to be disgusting. Right? Like there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. It's the application of it. If knowledge is intelligence, wisdom is what like the scientific world would call emotional intelligence. Can you really handle what you know? Wisdom is your ability to reason, to use logic or have self-control. It's persistence when things get hard. It's the ability to motivate yourself. It's controlling impulses and delaying gratifications, or regulating your mood and keeping distress from swamping your ability to think. Wisdom also helps you empathize and have hope. You see, what science in the world has showed us is that intelligence is not what is closest related to success. It's emotional intelligence. There was a guy that graduated from my high school and incredibly bright, aced the ACT and aced the SAT. Someone you're just like, man. But many times, that can make it very difficult to apply some of that. I had a teacher when I was growing up, and he was brilliant. And this would have been in middle school, and he was teaching math to middle schoolers. He should have been a college professor. Just because the way that his mind worked and it came out, it didn't make sense to a middle schooler. It probably would have made sense to someone in college. And some of those things are, having wisdom of how do I teach somebody. That's not to say that those people were terrible or they were dumb or anything like that. It's to say that it's not enough just to be smart and to gain wisdom and to memorize Proverbs. We have to be able to apply all of that. So the way that we gain wisdom, we see a few of them throughout Proverbs. And the first one is this. The first example comes to us in chapters 6 and 7, and it's through observation. It's through observation. They say, observe the ants. Look at what they do. They don't need somebody telling them what to do. They go and get food. They gather it together. They march in rows. They bring it in. They set it up. Learn from them. And he says, hey, observe the young guy that's a complete fool out my window. He's walking by and on a road he shouldn't be walking on. And this adulterous woman calls out to him and he just follows her voice like an ox going to slaughter. See, we don't always have to, we can learn wisdom through watching just things in life. You are wise if you walk through life with the eyes of God. Teach me something today. What do you want me to learn? Because everything in life can be a lesson if we're looking at it from the right perspective. If our eyes are open and if we're humble. We're going to talk about humility kind of at the end of this list because humility is key in every one of these things. Pastor Thor talked about humility last week and how important it is. But humility is not just an outcome of being wise. Humility is the process in which you become wise. It's not like, well, I'm wise, so I'm choosing to be humble. No, you would have never became wise if you weren't humble. The second way we can become more wise is through instruction. I'm sure all of us have been taught how to live by people that have gone before us. Parents, teachers, other people at work. Hey, don't tick off that person. They make the schedule. All right, you make them mad, you're not getting any of the days off you request. That's wisdom. Someone that has gone on before probably ticked off that person. They are imparting wisdom on you. They're teaching you. That's the second way that we can learn, and we see that through the Proverbs. The Proverbs themselves are teaching from earlier people. The third way we gain is by learning through our mistakes. Proverbs supposes that everyone will make mistakes. All right, it's not sitting there thinking everyone's going to do this perfectly. You're going to make all these choices. It presumes that you're going to make mistakes in life. Sometimes the mistakes that we make will have natural consequences. Natural consequences are my favorite. I love natural consequences in parenting. It's great. You didn't go to bed last night? Well, now you're tired this morning when I got you up for preschool. It's a natural consequence. I'm not doing anything. It's your body. There's times as adults we have natural consequences to our decisions. There's other times where there may be discipline and correction involved. And discipline and correction are difficult because in order for us to truly receive them, we have to admit that we made a mistake. We have to admit that we were wrong. Otherwise, you'll never actually receive any sort of correction. The last way that we grow in wisdom, it's mentioned throughout the book, it's mentioned right away at the beginning, is through the fear of the Lord. This phrase is used often and I think can be confusing to us as 21st century readers, not first century, 21st century readers. Now, fear of the Lord is not being scared of God. It's not being terrified of Him. We're meant to have a personal relationship. How many of you guys know that fear is not a good driving force in any relationship? When I go to the doctor, they always ask, do you feel safe at home? Well, yeah, most of the time my kids throw things at me and there's Legos left out. I'm scared I'm going to step on them. Besides that, I feel pretty good. You can't build a relationship if there's fear inside of there. And that's not what fear of the Lord means. Instead, what it means is it's a healthy sense of reverence and awe of God. It's knowing our place in this whole thing, right? My place is not to get to pick what is the definition of right and wrong. That's God's place. Even when I don't agree with it, even when it's inconvenient for me, that's not my place. We have to understand our place and His place and the relationship between the two to have a fear of the Lord. Proverbs 19:21 says, "Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails." 16:2 says, "All a person's ways seem pure to them, but motives are weighed by the Lord." So you might feel like you're being wise. You might be making a decision. You might be planning, feel like you have good motives. Ultimately, though, that's not our place to decide that. That's God's. And we have to remember that if we want to be wise. All wisdom starts and comes from God. You cannot be wise outside of Him. So what does all this mean for us? This is what we have to ask at the end of every message. What does this mean for us? I think as Christians, we know that Jesus is the purpose behind everything we do. So where is Jesus in the book of Proverbs? Where is Jesus in the application of the book of Proverbs? You see, Jesus is the embodiment of wisdom. While He was here, He was constantly described as wise. He's a 12-year-old boy teaching these teachers of the law, and we don't always understand. These teachers of the law, they were probably put into schools at 5 years old to memorize all of the law. I mean, they knew this like the back of their hand, and this 12-year-old boy is wise enough that he's teaching them. Now, He's not teaching them how to memorize it. He's using wisdom. He's teaching them, hey, you're not applying this correctly. That's not the right situation for this. He's continually described as wise. Paul does it several times through his book that he is the source of all wisdom. Our goal in life as Christians is to reflect Jesus more each day. Hopefully today I reflect more of Christ than I did yesterday. Hopefully tomorrow's better than today. I know that every once in a while I'm going to have a bad day. But our hope is that we're growing in our reflection of Christ. And that's what the Proverbs helps us do. Think of the Proverbs kind of as training wheels. We want to move to a place where we respond the way Jesus would have responded to a situation. So Proverbs is kind of like training wheels. Again, we're going with the kid thing because they were kind of written to kids. Training wheels helps them learn how to ride a bike. And eventually they get better and better. And they kind of ride the tires and they only touch down on the wheels every once in a while. But here's the thing with training wheels. I think most of us in the room probably could get on a bike with training wheels if it was our size, and we could ride it. But it would be frustrating. It would hinder us. It would be awkward. Now, I'm not saying that we cast off the book of Proverbs and get rid of it. What I am saying is, as we grow in our relationship with Christ, we are going to reflect Him more and more naturally. So we are going to reflect these Proverbs more and more naturally. Now, these are written to try and talk about hypothetical situations you're going to find yourself in. Most of us in this room have probably lived long enough to know that you cannot come up with every hypothetical that you will face in life. If we limit ourselves to the idea of, I have to continually read through this book, constantly memorizing it and trying to recall a proverb at the right time, it will hinder your walk with Christ. It will make your ability to reflect Him difficult. As we grow more and more like Christ, it's not that this book becomes useless. It's that we are reflecting this book more and more. So what we can do in the meantime, as we're moving towards that, is this. As we read through this over the month of January, and if you haven't started, I'd encourage you to just jump in. Read the first however many days you are behind, because really Proverbs is meant to be read as much together as you can to get the full picture. So you're probably actually going to be doing it better than the rest of us anyways. So read through, get caught up. But as you read through, if you see a proverb that is not the way you would handle a situation, it seems foreign to you, you need to stop and look at it, dig into it, because there's a very good chance that means that that's an area where you are not reflecting Christ the best way that you could. So as you guys are reading through, I want to encourage you, keep in mind all these things we said today. Highlight verses. If you find one, let's say that you're like, man, I really need to get better at dealing with money. Well, there's a lot in Proverbs about money. But don't go and find the one proverb that you like and it's like, hey, that kind of lines up with what I'm already doing. Highlight that one. I'm good. Go through, find every proverb. That's why we do this over a month. Maybe grab, as a family, buy a bunch of different colored highlighters. You have one for different themes that you see in Proverbs. Highlight them the same color. So at the end, you can go back and be like, man, look at all these things it says about money. Now, I'm going to use the wisdom, the emotional intelligence I have to think, how do I apply this? What does that really mean in my situation, in my life, in what I'm in right now? The debt that I'm in or the lack of debt that I'm in. What should I be doing when I get out of debt? To be able to walk through those things and apply them in the right way. And that's how we start to respond the way that Christ would respond to a situation, is when we truly have wisdom and we can apply it in the right time and right situation. That's what wisdom is for us. Maybe as you're listening today, you are like, hey, you know what? I don't think I'm living my life the right way. I think that what you're talking about, if I were to put myself in the two categories, I'm in the category maybe of foolishness. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm not living it right. And I know the general principle of where that's going to lead my life. If that's you, I want to encourage you to come and talk with myself or one of the staff or one of the prayer team afterwards. We would love to point you in the right direction of getting your life where you're living for Jesus, where you're living in a way that the general idea is that, hey, life is going to get better. It doesn't mean life's going to be great and everything's going to go perfect. But when we start to walk in the way that Jesus has commanded us to, we're going to start to see the fruit of that as well. So I would encourage you, if that's you, come and talk to me afterwards. For the rest of us, I hope that today, like I said, I know it's not like this amazing page-turning type thing, but it's such important information. If we're going to gather things out of this book, we need to know how to correctly do it. So my hope today is that did help you with that. So let's close in prayer, and I want to encourage you guys, be going through the book of Proverbs with the church. Talk with people, talk with friends, talk with family about it. Hey, I read this today. I think I need to get better at applying this. Keep me accountable in that. So, God, we are so thankful, Lord, that we have this book that can speak to us, that we can read through, that can help us. Lord, I pray that we would have your wisdom to move in the right direction. God, that when we run into situations today or tomorrow, this week, God, that we would look at it as a situation. We look at it through your eyes. God, that we would be able to respond in the best way that we can. Lord, I know that that's difficult. I know that it's hard for us to always try and live the way you live. It's exhausting sometimes. But God, we know that that's what's best for us. We know that that's what we need to do. God, I pray for anybody that maybe is feeling discouraged right now. God, I pray that as they read through this book, that you would just lift them up, Lord, that you would encourage them in what's happening in their life. God, I pray that as a church, we'd walk away from the month of January and we'd be starting 2019 on the right foot. Lord, that we'd be stronger because of it. God, that we can just look to you in these things. Jesus, we ask that in your name today. Amen.